This week we find ourselves in the 38th portion of the Torah studies, and of course this one is none other than portion Korah, and we find this portion encapsulating Numbers chapters 16, 17, and 18. And when it comes to Korah and Co., there's a lot of lessons to be learned, even though this portion is named after one single individual. But one of the things I want to turn our attention to early on is the name Korah itself. And it, just like many other Hebrew words, holds more than just a single respective meaning. It's one of the words that actually has multiple meanings. And a couple of those meanings I'll even share with you now are balding or baldness. Such a great topic to come from somebody who's about to enter into middle age. And then also holds a meaning of frost or ice. And I think I'm going to cover my thoughts on that more towards the end of this teaching. But as we navigate this whole situation of Korah and Korah's rebellion, I want you to kind of see if you can mentally piece together the associative meanings of his names and how that could apply in this situation in Numbers chapter 16. And we may as well get into it now. In number 16, we find it starting to introduce us to Korah. And I had mentioned when we just started navigating the book of Numbers, we talked about the Kohathites and about how it was this family's responsibility to undertake the covering of the holy items, the holy vestments, whenever they began to pack up and travel from point A to point B to, again, point C. As they would pack up and they would go to their different locations, it was the responsibility of the Kohathites to actually help cover up and swallow up these items, because after all, they were holy. They weren't something that was to be common paraded through the people or shown on complete and utter display. These were things that they had to make sure that were garnered respect to not just themselves, but to also the community. And we find in this introduction of Korah, he is actually a part of the Kohathites. And this job, this responsibility, it wasn't something that people would look down their nose at or sneer at. This was something that was actually incredibly important. Outside of perhaps what Moses was doing and Aaron was doing, I think they probably held some of the most prolific responsibilities amongst all the people. And so Korah comes up with 250 men of renown, people who were very high esteemed within the community. And all of a sudden they decide that they're going to stand against Moses and they're going to stand against Aaron. And their big calling card on this is, you take too much upon yourselves, because not just are you two holy, this whole entire congregation is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord? And it says that when Moses heard it, he fell on his face, and he spoke to Korah and all of his company, saying, tomorrow morning the Lord will show you who is his and who is holy, and will cause him to come near to him. That one whom he chooses he will cause to come near him. Do this: take censers, Korah and all of your company, and put fire in them and put incense in them before the Lord tomorrow. And it shall be the man whom the Lord chooses, is the Holy One. You take too much upon yourselves, you sons of Levi. And so whenever I began to read this and I start thinking about some of the stuff going on, I almost have flashbacks, because the last time I hear something about somebody taking up incense and altar pans and presenting fire before the Lord, it was Nadab and Abihu. Those were the first two sons of Aaron, the ones who wound up losing their lives because they brought a profane or unknown or unholy fire before the Lord. And I know there's a lot of speculation, a lot of hoopla as to why it was that they were dismissed, to put it very lightly, from their responsibilities and for their job. And I think the long and skinny of it is they decided to act in a form of worship that God never ordained. They brought a fire that was unasked to the Lord. And so that is my whole perspective and thoughts on worship. You might have good meanings, or you might trying to be making a spectacle or some type of show out of something, and maybe your heart's not in a horrible place. You're not trying to be deceitful. But we have to realize that if we're going to operate in the mechanics of worship and usefulness to God, we need to make sure we have the blessing of the king. We need to make sure we have the blessing of God. And one of the things that we find here with Korah and Co., what do they want to do? They're trying to elevate themselves in the world in a spiritual manner that God never asked them to do. And it says, is it a small thing to you that God of Israel has separated you from the congregation of Israel to bring you near to himself, to do the work of the tabernacle of the Lord, and to stand before the congregation to serve them? Again, he's reminding them, you have not just this responsibility, you already have this God-given, God-ordained privilege to serve in a capacity that really hardly anybody else gets to fathom what it is that you do. This isn't some common, mundane job that is just so common in the world as a penny to us nowadays. This is something that is a privilege and an honor. And is that not enough for you? And I feel like a lot of the times, even in the world of the churchdom, we're doing a lot of things that they look good, they sound good, and we want God to bless us in our endeavors. But maybe perhaps we take too much upon ourselves. God is going to give the grace for the things he wants and needs done. And if it's something that he is wanting to accomplish through us, he will make the means and ways happen. And it says in verse 10, and that he brought you near to himself, you and all your brethren, the sons of Levi, with you. Are you now also seeking the priesthood for yourselves? Therefore you and your company are gathered together against the Lord. And what is Aaron that you might complain against him? And then Moses sent to call for Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and he said, we will not come up. Is it a small thing that you have brought us up out of the land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness, that you should keep acting like a prince over us? And here's the thing. Just to play it fair, just to give an observation, I don't see anything that the Kohathites themselves have done to bring national disgrace at this point in time upon Israel. There's no big dilemma that was started by them. But I want you to go back to the book of Exodus, just right about halfway through. We have Sinai happening, we have Moses making the ascension. What's going down at the base of a mountain? All of a sudden, you wind up having all the people who... There's the golden calf situation that happens. And who's the one who casts the golden calf? Who's the one who creates this image? It's none other than Aaron himself. But we don't really find Aaron punished for doing that. But we find there's a lot of people who wound up dying over this particular sin. We don't find the Kohathites creating any false images. We don't find them going along with anything of that sort of nature. So maybe there's credence, There's already a blemish a couple of times on Aaron's record. He spoke against his brother and his marriage. I think it was the last portion, one of the last two, if not. Even before that, you've got the incident with the golden calf. We find some things that are going amiss and people are pointing it out. So maybe the Kohathites, maybe they felt like they didn't get a fair shake of the stick. I kind of understand the situation. But we don't find Aaron necessarily being punished for a lot of the stuff he gets wrong either. But again, it's not for ourselves to take upon that authority. That is something that we have to rely on God to distribute. We're his kids. We get the instructions from our Father. And if somebody decides that they want to act out of line, it's perfectly fine. Let God spank them. They're not my kids, they're my brothers. That's just the way I look at it. But whenever we get to verse 13, they start saying, it's not a small thing that you brought us up out of the land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness, that you should keep acting like a prince over us. And here's the thing. It wasn't all that long ago Moses was telling God he probably needed to kill him because he can't stand being around these people any longer. And then they're saying, oh, you just want to be a king. You want to be a prince over us. And I'm assessing the situation mentally. These people are calling Egypt, the place that was of restriction, it was a place of bondage. They didn't have the freedoms. And yet these people are calling that land the land of milk and the land of honey and all of the goodness and gracious things. They're looking to nostalgia. They're looking for familiarity instead of the faithfulness of God to bring a promise to them and bring them to said promise. If you really want to look at it, these children themselves are the promise. And instead of finding full and complete fulfillment, they're just wanting to go back to what they came from. And in verse 14, moreover, you have not brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey, nor given us inheritance of fields and vineyards. Will you put out the eyes of the men? We're sick of it. We're done. We're not coming up. And it says that Moses was very angry and said to the Lord, do not respect their offering. I have not taken so much as a single donkey from them, nor have I heard any of them. And Moses said to Korah, tomorrow you and all of your company shall be present before the Lord, you and they as well as Aaron. Let each take his censer and put his incense in it, and each of you bring his censer before the Lord, 250, both you and Aaron, each with his censer. So every man took his censer, put fire in it, laid incense in it, and stood at the door of the tabernacle of meeting with Moses and Aaron. And Korah gathered all the congregation against them at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. Then the glory of the Lord filled and appeared to all the congregation. And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, separate yourselves from among the congregation, that I may consume them in a moment. They all fell on their faces and said, O God, the God of the spirits of all flesh, shall one man sin, and you be angry with the congregation? So the Lord spoke to Moses, speak to the congregation, and tell them, get away from the tents of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. And Moses rose and went to them, elders followed him. So it says they got away from around the tents of these three individuals, stood at the door of their tents, their wives, sons, and their little children. And here's verse 28. By this, says Moses, you shall know the Lord has sent me to do all of these works. I have not done them of my own will. Now, if these men die naturally like all men, or if they're visited by common fate, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord creates a new thing, the earth opens up its mouth and swallows them up with all that belongs to them, then they will go down alive into the pit. Then you will understand that these men have rejected the Lord. Now it came to pass, as he finished speaking this word, that the ground split under them, and the earth opened up its mouth and swallowed them with their households, and all of the men with Korah with all of their goods. And so they and all those with them went down alive into the pit, and the earth closed over them, and they perished from among the assembly. Then all of Israel who were around them fled at their cry, for they said, lest the earth swallow us up also. And so I'm taking a look at this, and I'm thinking, we know that Korah and his people, they're Kohathites. They're ones who swallowed up, they would cover up all of these items, these things that are holy, and transport. That was their responsibility. But they decided that they want to neglect the things that God had given them to do because they wanted a different job, and they wanted to seem better, more holy in the eyes of the people. And so since they decided to attempt to forsake and neglect their responsibility, what it was they were to do to those holy items actually happened to them. Korah wanted to be elevated spiritually. He wanted to be lifted up spiritually in the eyes of all of the people. And yet he was physically brought down lower than any of the rest of them, because he didn't seek the blessing of God. He wanted self-representation. He wanted self-fulfillment. He wanted elevation to get into the things that weren't any of his business being into. Earlier on, I had talked about how, like I said, they were Kohathites. How interesting is it that the Kohathites, who were to cover up these holy items, and things that are holy means they're sanctified, it means that they're things that are set apart. How interesting is it that it was their job to cover up, and the Hebraic word literally means to swallow up the holy items. when they decided to neglect that, the earth, the thing below, swallowed them up. People who were holy, people who were set aside. I'd mentioned earlier at the top of the teaching about how Korah, his name, it held a couple of meanings that I asked you if you would be able to contemplate, kind of juggle these couple of meanings. And I talked about how his name means balding or baldness, and that his name also means frosty or ice. As we were going through the story, I had asked you to kind of envision and kind of think about how that would work, how that would apply with who he is and what's going on. You get to the book of Hebrews, it talks about how our God is a consuming fire. As a matter of fact, when you go back to the beginning of the Bible, and not just the beginning, I mean the beginning of the beginning, you go to the very first word of the Bible, you actually have the 6-letter word Bereshit. If you take the middle letters, the core letters of Bereshit, you actually have the word Aish, Aleph, Shin. And together those two letters spell the word fire. You take letters 1, 2, 5, and 6, the letters that are left over, you actually have the word Brit, which means covenant. You actually find in the book of Hebrews God saying that he is a consuming fire. You actually find commentary within the first word of the entire book that God's word is a covenant of fire. How does this work in relation to Korah? How close was Korah in proximity to God? Yeah, he served the tabernacle. He covered up a lot of the holy things. Physically, he was doing the work of the tabernacle, but his heart, his mind, his soul, his spirit, within what proximity were those to God? They were pretty far away, because he wasn't seeking after the things of God. He was seeking after the things of self. Again, self-interest, not holiness. He was far away from the one who was a consuming fire, and he wound up being swallowed up by the earth. He was cold. He was frosty. It was almost like he represents ice in a way. And when it comes to baldness, have you caught that one yet? We find that Moses, how many times did the congregation want to put him to death? How many times did the congregation want to put Aaron to death? We find that them working their God-given assignment, there was a covering that God had to protect them with. We actually find that Israel itself was protected, if you remember, by the pillar of fire, by the cloud. We find that there was covering, there was sanction, there was safety that was given to them. But whenever we find Korah, he walked outside of the realm of that safety. He lost that covering. And to me, at least in my mind, my perspective, I kind of relate that to the reason perhaps why his name means balding or baldness, because he lost that holy coverage by seeking more self. You go back to John chapter 3. Everybody knows the first half because everybody knows John 3:16. But who knows the back half of John chapter 3? And I love the back half of John chapter 3 because it talks about how John the Baptist, it looks like his ministry, instead of booming and exploding and getting bigger than it's ever been before, people start to notice it's starting to dry up. The numbers are getting lower. People are starting to get concerned, and they bring said concern to John the Baptist or John the Baptizer, the immerser himself. And what is his response? It's fine. Less of me and more of him. Because that's what holiness is. That's what meekness and humility is. Learning to dismiss ourselves and learning to promote more of his name. Not try to create this spiritual empire to where we're seen as somebody big and important in the eyes of everybody else. But to make sure that whenever we work, we minister, we cover, people are recognizing it's under the authority of God. So that's why every time that I have looked at the life of Korah, even though it is a story of sudden stoppage, there's some less than bright spots in the story. It's a warning to us not to overstep our bounds, but to check really the parameters of where we're at and what it is that we're doing. And so these are some of the things I hope you give consideration to, hope you have some thoughts about. And if you have any questions, feel free to throw those my way. If you have any comments or even rebuttals to anything I've said, we don't always love them, but they are welcomed. But as always, I thank you for your time. Be blessed.